I'm Ellen Brown. I've written a book called Web of Debt. It's my 11th book, and I'm an attorney by trade. Web of Debt is on the origin of our money system and the fact that it's based on an illusion. It's not really what we think it is. The reason the entire world is in debt is that the money has been borrowed not from other countries or other people who already had it. It's been borrowed from banks that create the money as it is lent. 99.9% of our money supply is created privately by banks. The only thing the government creates are coins, which compose only 1/1000th of the M3 money supply. I've used the Wizard of Oz for a theme because in the 1890s there was actually a movement for monetary reform. It was the last that we had a major populist movement to try to change the system. That was before the Federal Reserve Act, when the banker system was set in stone. So in the 1890s, William Jennings Bryan was running for president. And The Wizard of Oz was actually written as a monetary allegory about this movement. The author, Frank Baum, marched for William Jennings Bryan with the populace. He was also a theosophist, which was another popular new innovation then. And the basic theme of the theosophist was that you create your own reality. So there are two themes running through The Wizard of Oz. One is this money theme about the wizard is not really a wizard, and the witches are more powerful than the wizard. And well, there are many images that are clearly drawn from that movement. But the other theme is that that, for instance, the scarecrow already has a brain, the lion already has a heart, that abundance is ours if we realize that fact. We can have what we can realize. And we believe we're living in scarcity because of an illusion. And if we see through the illusion, we're actually living in a world of abundance. We can create our own abundance. That was the only time when the U.S. government actually created its own money rather than borrowing it from banks. And Lincoln did it because he was suddenly thrust into a war as soon as he was elected. And the bankers, these are British bankers, were going to charge him 24 to 36% interest on loans, and he could see that there was no way they could pay that back. They would be in debt to the bankers forever, which is what usually happens in war. That's how the international banking monopoly has gotten control of countries worldwide, is by wars where they've funded both sides. So Lincoln managed to win this 4-year war partly by issuing greenbacks, which were government-issued money, and then that money stayed in the system. It was only $450 million, but it kept being renewed for the next half century, when it made up a major part of the monetary supply. Most people think money is created by the government. That's not true. 99.9% of our money is created by banks when they make loans. The problem with that is that they create the principal, but they don't create the interest. So since they're the only source of money in the system, somebody has to continually be taking out new debt just to find the interest to keep a money supply in existence. And that means we're always continually going into debt, but the whole system's based on a fraud or an illusion or a counterfeiting of money. So we could set the whole thing right, but we'd have to change radically change our money system back to what was intended by the colonists in the 18th century, when they actually went to war in order to preserve a form of money that they didn't manage to preserve. We haven't had the money that they fought for 200 years, which is government-created money. The only money that government creates are coins. Well, I'm a writer first. I'm also an attorney, but I see my role as sort of as a translator between this investor, economist world that most people don't understand and think is too complicated to understand. It's actually too complicated because they want it to be complicated. It's rather like doctors don't want you to understand their language, but it's very simple when you boil it down to its basics. So that's what I've done, is translate it into terms that ordinary people can understand. The illusion is that the banks actually had the money that they lent you. It didn't exist until they wrote it up into an account. Most of our money is not even paper anymore. It's mostly just numbers in an account. So a bank writes up the loan as a deposit, and it balances its books by double entry bookkeeping. It writes it up as an asset to itself because you've agreed to pay it back, making it a negotiable instrument with present value. And it's a liability to themselves because they owe you that money, so their books balance. So you're spending something that didn't exist until you borrowed it. Which is not a bad system. It's actually how we've funded an abundant economy for 300 years. The problem with it is that we've allowed a private monopoly to pretend that it was their money that they lent to us, when in fact all we've done is turn our own promise to repay into money, which we could do as a community, as a federal or community or government system, the way the early colonists did it. The American colonists were the first to use paper money that was issued by the government. Actually, the Chinese did it, but the first Western country. And they did it because they didn't have gold and silver. They just didn't have the money to pay their debts. So the governor of Massachusetts in 1691 got the idea of printing up little receipts and paying them to his soldiers and people that he owed money to, and then those receipts traded in the community as if they were legal tender. They were legal tender. At the same time, there was another system developed in England where private banks were issuing banknotes, and supposedly these banknotes were backed by gold, but in fact they discovered that they could issue many more times notes than they actually had gold. They just had to keep enough gold for the people who came for their money, which is about 10% of their customers. So that's what the fractional reserve banking system is still based on today, that they can lend 10 times as much money as they have in reserve. And in fact, the reserves aren't even gold anymore. They're just promissory notes from the U.S. bonds are the original reserves of the Federal Reserve. There were several systems among the colonies, and some of them worked better than others. The Massachusetts system actually didn't work real well because they just printed, and they did inflate their currency and devalued it. But the system that worked really well, and that I think we should go back to, was in Pennsylvania, where the government had its own bank. It was the bank, and it created money. Say you would create $105, you would lend $100 to the farmers at 5% interest, and then you would spend the other $5 on roads and bridges and things that that government did, that people needed. So you would have $105 out in the system, and then you could take that whole $105 back to repay the loan. So you would have a completely contained system. It didn't inflate, and during the whole period that the whole first half of the 18th century, they paid no taxes. My website is webofdebt.com. It's also on Amazon, and that's the name of it, Web of Debt.